Hello, everybody. Excuse me, and welcome back to the channel Airbus. What's it doing now? In this episode, we're going to take a look at a safety first item or an article in the Safety First magazine, which anybody can access to. This is on the safety part of the channel. For those of you that are new, we review some articles in Safety First and see what learning points we can take away from it. Now, I was directed to this one because we're having a look at bulk landings, etc., in our current or our recurrent semester for the summer. And this article, as with all these articles, is available for anybody to read. If you haven't got the app yet, go ahead and download it from the Apple Store or Google Play. It's called the Airbus Safety Magazine, Safety First, and there's lots of articles in there, including this one. So what we do here is we just take a read through the article itself, and as I say, I was directed to this because it's something that we're looking at in the current semester, and it's all to do with the last point at which you can carry out a bulk landing or a go around, and of course that is when reverser is selected. And this particular article is titled "Thrust Reverser Selection is a Decision to Stop," and there are some really important fundamental take homes from this. So as always, what I plan to do is read through the article and then just add my own take on things and some of the things that I took away from it, and maybe enhance some things just to put a bit of extra context to it where I can. So this particular event, it was a very sudden and challenging event involving startle, confusing indications at very low to the ground. As with all of these, there's no judgment on the crew whatsoever because we don't ever have the full picture on this, and it's all about learning and learning from actual events. There's some important takeaways, as I mentioned, and it involves a bulk landing or a go around after the reversers are selected, and why a bulk landing must only be carried out until such time as the reversers are selected. And if that's the last point we can do it, once the reversers are selected, then it must be a full stop. So like I say, there's no judgment on the crew here. We don't have the full picture, but some important takeaways here. So let me read through the article for you. This SOP for landing requests that the flight crew perform a full stop landing after thrust reversers have been selected. However, in-service flight data analysis revealed that the equivalent of one go-around per month is performed after selection of thrust reversers. Now, it talks later on about the millions of flights that have been recorded over a number of airlines, and one per month. It's obviously too many because we'll look at the consequences in just a moment in this particular example. But it's a small amount, but nevertheless an important one to remind ourselves about. Now, the article describes an event where the flight crew performed a go-around after they had selected reversers on an A320 aircraft, and importantly with CFM 56 engines, more of that later. The reverser on one engine remained deployed until the end of the flight. The article explains how adherence to SOPs will prevent the recurrence of this kind of event, and describes the product enhancements that Airbus developed as additional safety barriers. Now, it's important to note that this logic applies at the time of release to the CFM 56 engines, with enhancements planned for 2025. And this article goes back a little way, and I don't know whether those enhancements have taken place on the CFM 56. Maybe you'll know a bit more about that if you're from an engineering background within your company, or whether you can make inquiries, or whether this information has been released to you, or when in 2025 this is to take place. As well as that, there are some EIS updates which your aircraft may already have. So it's very important here to check your aircraft configuration summary so you know the status of your aeroplane. So just to recap on that, plans for an upgrade released on the CFM56 engines in 2025, as well as an EIS update, which will be EIS2. We'll come on to that more later on, but just as a heads up, EIS2, if you have that, that will take this enhancement into effect, and I'll explain what that enhancement means in just a moment. So the case study itself, an A320 aircraft fitted with CFM56 engines was on an ILS approach in flap 3 configuration with good visibility conditions, and there was a 25 knot crosswind and gusts from the left hand side. We can see that in this figure here, where it shows side stick, thrust lever position, the N1 indication with reverser, and then laterally later on we'll talk about the selection of toga. Now the crosswind is of real importance here, as the left main landing gear bounce is what brings the logic of this into question. There's a few things going on here: timing, some asymmetry in the thrust levers, a bounce at the time that took, all kind of went into the melting pot to cause this particular circumstance to be triggered. But I'd say fairly unique, but anyway, we'll read on. Now, the pilot flying initiated the flare slightly above 30 feet rad out, started the decrab maneuver at 24 feet rad out, and then set the thrust levers to idle at 11 feet rad out. The left main landing gear briefly touched the runway, but was not fully compressed when the flight crew set the thrust levers to maximum reverse. So left wheel down, not fully compressed at this point, and then they get selected full reverse. And of course, you'll get the rev ECAM when they're not fully compressed. More of that in just a moment. Now, when both the left and right main landing gear touched the runway and were compressed, ground mode, the thrust levers began to deploy. Now, the flight crew then decided to perform a go-around. Remember, this is a go-around after the reversers have been selected, which is what this case study is all about. The left main landing gear was briefly uncompressed, which is very important, when the pilot flying applied toga thrust. They selected config 2 and applied the nose up inputs. Now, selecting config 2 low to the ground would suggest that it was a normal go-around. Now, the flight crew training manual in SOP tail strike avoidance and the normal supplementary procedures considering go-around near the ground are important to note, and of course tail strike avoidance, etc. You can read that in the FCOM. Engine 2 spooled up after the toga was selected to reach toga thrust, but very interestingly, engine 1 remained at idle. The rev indication still displayed on the engine warning display, as you can see in figure 2. Now, the aircraft began to veer left, obviously, because of the asymmetry. The pilot flying reacted and applied half maximum right rudder input. Obviously, because the pilot flying sensed the asymmetry. There was no beta target at this point, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Both the left and right main landing gear were briefly compressed again, so there's the bounce. The aircraft continued to veer to the left, and then engine 1 reverser unlocked ECAM alert triggered when the main left and right main landing gear were uncompressed. So they've bounced back up into the air. The left engine is at, the right engine is at toga, the left engine is at idle. The beta target symbol on the PFD was flagged, as I mentioned, and the aircraft overflew the runway edge by 1 foot. Now, the reverser unlocked engine 1, unlocked engine 1 and toga on engine 2 caused a significant asymmetry. Now, we'll see exactly why later. And the no beta target, which again we'll discuss later on, the half rudder deflection, quick thinking, I think, of the pilot flying, obviously realized the problem and selecting an appropriate pitch, which was 12.5 degrees, which is a simulated a single engine go around. Now, the flight crew commanded the landing gear up and the aircraft started to climb on a trajectory that was shifted by approximately 20 degrees to the runway axis. When the landing gear was retracted and the pitch was set close to 12.5, corresponding to the target go around for one engine operative, the vertical speed reached 1,000 feet a minute. So while all this was going on, the crew obviously the pilot flying was quite quick thinking, realised that there was an asymmetry, applied an appropriate amount of rudder, must have quite quickly realised that for whatever reason he was now single engine, he or she was now single engine, or they, and carried out what looks like a single engine go around. So yeah, you can imagine that that is a very demanding situation. Startle, absolutely. Now the flight crew then set the engine 1 thrust lever to idle at around 360 feet and shut down the engine 1 as per the ECAM procedure. At 1,260 feet QNH, the beta target then appeared. More of that later, again, and on the PFD, which enabled the pilot flying to correctly trim the rudder, and the autopilot was engaged. Now, if you have a look at the FCOM, and I think I've got a clip here, the engine shutdown is likely due to buffet, as indicated on the ECAM, when the thrust doors open. I would imagine buffet would have been quite significant because I think from memory, 4 of the doors were actually open. So the ECAM says if buffet, engine master 1 off, from memory. But say I have a clip. Here. So I can imagine. I mean, look at the size of those doors. They're not the sleeves that you get on newer engines, but these engines with the doors, and we've covered thrust reversers. Get my teeth in another episode. That would have caused some significant buffet, I should imagine. The flight crew performed a second ILS approach and manually landed the aircraft with engine 1 inoperative. The aircraft arrived at the gate with 3 of the 4 engine 1 thrust reverser blocker doors deployed and not locked. The 4th door was not deployed but was unlocked. Okay, so my apologies. So 3 of them were open, one of them wasn't. And that's a prerequisite for some circumstances for the idle protection, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Right, so the event analysis, the thrust reverser deployment sequence, and the analysis now goes on to explain why we got idle on the engine 1 and toga on engine 2. And I take a little look at some of the tech associated with that. So the thrust reversers unlocked when both the left and the right main landing gear were compressed. When the pilot flying applied toga thrust, the thrust reversers on the left and right engines were not fully deployed at that point, and hence the amber reverse indication was still displayed on the EWD. Just a note here, the amber reverse when the reverser system is unlocked, and it's green when they are fully deployed. So it's showing here at the time that they are unlocked, but not fully deployed. And again, this is on the CFM56 engines, okay? Now, when thrust levers are moved from the reverse sector to idle or forward thrust, so the reverse is cancelled essentially, the electronic control unit, the ECU, for each engine computes a ground or flight status using compressed or uncompressed data for the left and right main landing gear. This is provided by the Landing Gear Control Interface Unit, the LGCIU. And again, that's shown in figure 4. It just shows you the sequence of events here. So the ECU computes a flight or ground status, uncompressed or compressed, and that data comes from the LGCIUs, of course. So if the computed status is ground, when the thrust reversers are moved out of the reverse sector, then the ECU will send a stow command until the thrust reversers are stowed. If the computer status is flight, then the ECU does not send a signal to initiate the stow sequence. So that's really critical. That's why this happened. The left main landing gear was showing airborne. The right main landing gear was showing compressed at the time that the incident happened, and we got a stow on the right. We didn't get a stow on the left. We got toggle on the right. We got idle on the left. Now, you'd think that it just would do it regardless, wouldn't you? And of course, this is one of the updates that we will investigate later. Have a little look now in the FCOM about protections and auto stow, and the FCOM details the auto stow logic in a schematic, and of course, all this comes from data from the LGCIUs, and it all depends on whether your ground or flight mode compressed or uncompressed. We'll investigate this further in a moment, but due to the timing of the bounce of the left main landing gear, flight was recognized by the EIU. So it's the flight mode that caused this to happen, plus a couple of other bits and pieces which we'll talk about later. So why engine 1 thrust reverser did not stow and lock? When the pilot flying set toga thrust, ECU1 computed flight status using the information from LGCIU1. ECU1 did not send a stow command to engine 1 reverser, and its blocker doors remained deployed. The automatic idler protection activated and sent a signal to prevent engine 1 increasing thrust. What caused the difference between engine 1 and engine 2 then? Now, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it, really? You don't want toga thrust when you've got the reversers out. Now, this idle protection is a condition that caused the beta target to be flagged, but more of that in a moment. It's the idle protection, I should say, that was one of the causal factors of the beta target not to be displayed. Also, there was a short asynchronism between the computation of the ground flight status by both ECUs, combined with the bounce of the left landing gear, explains the different behaviors of the two ECUs. This timing difference can be explained by the fact that the thrust levers may not be closely aligned when the flight crew moves them from reverse idle to forward thrust sector. In addition, a very slight delay may appear between the signals and computation chain LGCIU, EIU to ECU, lots of mnemonics there, which are independent both left and right side. So you can see here there's a myriad of circumstances here that have led to this. So one is the bounce, the uncompressed to then compressed. There's perhaps a slight asymmetry in the thrust lever, plus there's a timing of the information getting to the computers to actually compute what's happened. And I think what's happened here is the engine number 1 hasn't had time to compute it, has seen the fact that the aircraft is airborne with the reversers unlocked, deployed I should say, and the idle protections kicked in and prevented that engine from producing forward thrust, which makes sense, doesn't it? You don't want forward thrust when you've got reverse, well, you don't want any thrust when you've got reversers selected. Okay, makes that part of it makes sense. It's just the fact why they didn't stow, and because that the explanation is just there. So they summarise this here: a short delay between the computation of the ground or flight status by ECU1 and ECU2, combined with the main landing gear bounce condition on the left side, caused engine 1 thrust reverser blocker doors to remain deployed and engine 1 set at auto idle, the idle protection. Quite a mouthful, really, isn't it? And understanding the tech behind it. The left main landing gear bounced into flight mode before EIU1 and ECU1 could compute ground mode and computed flight mode, and possibly the slight asymmetry of the thrust levers. I think quite a unique set of circumstances. But look, it's happened, and we say unique. But how often have you landed in a crosswind where you've touched for the main landing gear, left or right has touched, depending on which side the wind is coming from? A lot, I should imagine, particularly in the winter. And if reversers were selected and then a toga was then initiated, you could see, albeit unique, just how plausible, how possible this is to any one of us. Let's just have a look and just review this slightly. The article wants to make it clear that it's limited aircraft with CFM56 engines. Now, a study of the reversal logic was performed on A320 aircraft equipped with the CFM56 and all other types engines, as well as other Airbus types, including the A220, and it confirmed that only the A320 and the 340 equipped with CFM56 engines can be affected by this potential for the thrust reversers not to retract if the crew decides to perform a go-around after reverse thrust is selected. The article then goes on to the beta target not displayed due to EIS logic, which is very interesting, because we know that if you've got, I think, more than 80% set on one or N1, or the difference between the two is greater than 35%, then you should get the beta target. But it explains here now, so I should revert to my notes there, that the current EIS logic flags the beta target symbol on the PFD if the reversers are not stowed and the auto idle protection is active. Well, there you go. This explains why the beta target symbol was flagged in the early stage of the go-around, pretty much when the crew really needed it, and before engine 1 was shut down. As soon as engine 1 was shut down, the beta target reappeared on the PFD as those thrust, as we mentioned, conditions existed. I've made a little note here, the idle protection in the FCON, basically if reverse not selected and the doors are or 4 doors are unstowed, which they were in this case. 3 were open and one was unlocked, and that's what caused the idle protection. Good. Impact on aircraft control and performance. The flight crew had to cope with a fast lateral trajectory deviation together with a significant degradation of climb performance during an already demanding maneuver. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Significant pitch and roll values reached close to the ground. In the initial phase of the go-around, the aircraft altitude went close to wingtip and tail strike conditions, but remained within the ground clearance limits. So, remain within ground clearance limits. That's the important thing. Figure 5, screen captures from a video reconstruction of the event showing the aircraft attitude at the early stages of the go-around phase, and the flight animation systems from APS Aerospace is what it says there. Now, operational considerations in closing. Adherence to the SOP for landing will prevent reoccurrence of a similar event and ensure optimum safe use of thrust reversers regardless of the engine type and on any aircraft. So basically what they're saying there, it doesn't matter what engine type you have, whether you've got the update or not, whether you're CEO, CFM56, NEO, the SOP is clear. Once reverse is selected, it's a stop. ASOP for landing, request the flight crew select thrust reversers immediately after landing gear touchdown and not before, to ensure timely deployment of the thrust reversers for optimum aircraft deceleration on landing. Very clear there. Thrust reverser selection means full stop, so they're coming at it from all angles here. The SOP for landing also states that as soon as the flight crew selects reverse thrust, they must perform a full stop landing. I think this is becoming very clear. This is also highlighted for a go-around near the ground in the FCTM, which states the pilot flying must not initiate a go-around after the selection of reverse thrust. Adherence to this SOP will avoid any repeat of the event described in this article. The A220 FCOM limitation chapter also states that go-around maneuver and touch and go are prohibited after deployment of thrust reversers. There's a similar event apparently described in a previous Safety First article, occurred in A300-600 series with a different reverser system architecture. Now the root cause was different, but it also highlighted how adherence to the SOP for landing would have prevented the event. This is thrust reverser selection means full stop. Now we'll take a look at this perhaps at another time. I'm not going to cover that. I'm not going to cover that here. Now, I mentioned earlier on about product enhancements, both to engine and EIS. Airbus performed flight data analysis with inputs from 31 operators for 3.4 million flights of A320 family aircraft. The results show that the equivalent of one go-around per month is performed with the thrust reversers already selected, which represents significant exposure. So it doesn't sound like an awful lot, but one a month is not a chance of something like this to happen. Now, consequently, Airbus decided to address this issue with updates to the, sorry, I think I burped there, to the ECU software, the EIS software, and the relevant documentation. Now, the ECU software update for CFM56 engines. Now, the update for the ECU software for CFM56 is under development, and I mentioned this is coming out in 2025. It includes an enhanced stow logic in the case of a rejected landing with reversers already selected. This will prevent reoccurrence of the event described in this article. The ECU software update is planned to be available in 25 for the CFM56B engines and is under review for the 56-5A and 5C variants. Now, perhaps this will amend the auto stow logic with the ground and flight modes. I don't know, but some software update is required there in order to prevent these circumstances from happening again. The EIS update is all to do with EIS2 software being modified to enable the display of the beta target on the PFD when the reverser doors are unlocked. This enhancement will be implemented in the EIS2 standard, so you'll be able to see whether or not your aircraft has that on your aircraft configuration summary, which you'll do as part of your pre-flights, presumably. Yeah, okay, just finishing off then, the enhancement of the SOP for landing. The SOP for landing will be updated to move the following text from the FCOM layer 2, L2, to L1, so layer 1, to making it more visible to the flight crew. It'll say the flight crew must select reverse thrust immediately after landing gear touchdown. As soon as the flight crew selects reverse thrust, they must perform a full stop landing. So basically, in their manuals, going from layer 2 to layer 1. The SOP for landing states that as soon as the flight crew selects reverse thrust, they must perform a full stop landing. I think I've said that a few times now. Analysis of in-service data shows there's still a risk of exposure if flight crews decide to perform a go-around after thrust levels were selected. This incident that happened on the A320 highlighted a risk of having one of the engines with the reversers still deployed in the case of a go-around initiated after reversal deployment on aircraft equipped with CFM56 engines. Application of the SOP should prevent this kind of event from happening. However, Airbus decided to introduce the aircraft modification to further prevent this scenario from happening and enhance documentation by making the recommendation to perform full stop landings after station reverse more visible to the flight crew. There it is, folks. Many take-homes, I think. I think for me, the tech understanding is very interesting. I know we've covered engines, we've covered reversers, and we've covered landing gear. And it's very interesting to see how those things come together in how the aircraft senses ground and flight mode, how they interact with the engine interface in the reverse thrust sense. It's learning from these events also that forces change, and that can only enhance safety. So learning from these events, we get to read about them. We get to see how they've occurred. It focuses our mind on the SOP, and it also focuses Airbus, or the manufacturer, to look at ways in which they can prevent something like this happening again under similar circumstances. The bottom line, of course, is follow the SOP, and it wouldn't have happened, but it did, and it shows that it can. And so Airbus's remit is to try and reduce the likelihood of that happening again, as well as attacking it from our SOP side. Hopefully, we won't see a likely recurrence. The second take home for me is remember the bulk landing. Now, if your company procedures include this go around close to the ground, A go around can only be performed before the reversers. Once the reversers are selected, you stop. Now, whether that's a go around from close to the ground or it's a balk landing, the latest time at which you can do that is before the reversers are selected. Once the reverse is selected, it is a stop, and that's a reminder for all of us. And I think the last take home for me is this is a reminder of of the sometimes challenging situations that we can all face, and this or something similar can happen to any one of us. Mitigate the risk by adherence to SOPs, knowledge, application of procedures, strong competencies here. Stay safe. Okay. Keep the plate spinning. Thank you very much for watching this this particular episode. I hope you're able to take something from it. As always, if you've got anything to say, anything to suggest, to add, or any questions, please leave them in the messages section, or drop me a line personally, and I'll try and get back to you. But in the meantime, stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you again on another episode in the near future. Bye for now.